Professor Shamika Ravi. The report is titled Share of Religious Minorities Across Country Analysis Between 1950 and 2015. And as you can imagine, it's already become a big media headline, a flashpoint on the political battlefield, and you're seeing it across media at this point of time. Professor Shamika Ravi is a member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister and the lead author of this report that has just been published. Professor Ravi, welcome. Good to see you. Thank you very much for your time here on India Today to discuss some aspects of this report. Of course, there are many findings, there are many figures, many statistics in this report, but obviously the one that's caught everybody's attention are the figures that I just read out. The share of the majority Hindu population that has declined by about 7.82% over 65 years since 1950, and the share of the Muslim population increasing by about 43.15%. Taking just those two figures, Professor Ravi, what are the implications of that?
Well, Shiv, before we get into the implications, clearly the demographic changes are happening on the ground. The idea of this paper was to look at what is happening, what is the status of minorities across countries of the world. This is therefore a cross-country study over 65 years for over 167 countries across all continents. Now, the main finding, what you notice here, are twofold. One is that the changes that are happening in India, which is the share of minority has grown significantly, and this is minority as a collective, and for individual groups, of course, that is the question you asked. Yes. But I want to highlight that this study is to find out what is happening to overall share of minority across countries. And we find that, India, the changes that are happening in this country are similar to what is happening in liberal democracies of the world, which are open and therefore quite fostering. They are nurturing towards minorities. Quite contrary to, of course, our own neighborhood, if you consider that almost all our neighbors, if you consider not just Bangladesh, Pakistan, Afghanistan, but also Sri Lanka and Bhutan, yes, where the share of minorities have actually fallen alarmingly. So I think, these are the highlights in terms of the interest that I see in the Indian media. But of course, there are very fascinating findings from Africa, for instance, that there were 24 countries that had animism as the most predominant religion, and today none of those countries have animism as a majority. So I think the global demography in terms of religion is in a deep flux, and it's important to study these.
Yeah, you're right, Professor Ravi. The report, I have to say, because I did happen to read a large part of it, it does have a lot of information about different parts of the world, including India's neighborhood. Very eye-opening data about the neighborhood, in that comparison that you just mentioned as well. But the attention being paid to the figures that I just put out are obvious because we're in the middle of an election. There's an atmosphere of polarization. I'll get to that part in just a little bit. But taking off on something you just mentioned about a comparison between the figures here in India as far as the minority population are concerned compared, with how it is in countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan, etc. Do these figures in that case sort of blunt the narrative, ma'am, that minority populations or the Muslim population in India is under siege or under threat, or that India is anti-minority in some way? Does this blunt that narrative?
Oh, 100%. And let me be very upfront here, Shiv, that to the researchers in the room, everyone who's listening who might have seen this research, there is nothing new here, other than, of course, the larger global trends. But what has happened in India over the last 65 years is not news. Maybe the magnitude of the relative differences might be, which is why to us who follow numbers, it is always a bit surprising when we find India repeatedly under a global sort of a Western attack, that minorities in this country are under threat, because they are clearly not. And now there are many things that lead to relative shares growing over time, right? We in this paper do not get into specific aspects of it. Now, it could be fertility differences, but we know that is narrowing now. We know it could be migration, legal, illegal. It could be conversions, and we haven't had any serious conversations on any of this at a disaggregated level or even a regional sort of a level. So this study is therefore like a first step. It's a first step to recognizing the trends objectively. We are putting the facts on the table. So what you are asking in terms of implications will then flow from here. Because now we have to see what is driving these kind of changes, but clearly it has policy implications for the future.
Professor, as far as the media is concerned, the elephant in the room is going to be the timing. This report drops after 3 phases of elections. There are 4 phases to go. Some would argue that the whole Hindu, I hate to simplify things because this is, I have to say, a complex report. It has, different facets from different parts of the world. But the Hindu-Muslim part that I just quoted, becomes something of a weapon in the hands of our politicians during an election. So people will question the timing of this report coming out. How would you respond to them?
When you ask me this, the first thing that strikes me is, in the midst of the pandemic, when I used to follow the sort of the virus in terms of the spread of the infection, many people, like hundreds of thousands of people, used to follow these daily trends, but invariably, I would always get some people who would say, why are you putting out this number? Because they make people complacent. Or somebody alternately would say, why are you putting this number? This will put fear in people. Now, I am of the opinion, being an empiricist economist, that not knowing numbers or not knowing factually what is the situation on the ground cannot possibly be a better situation. So we have to know these things. Now, as far as your question on why this timing, frankly, the timing of research is really beyond us because people have asked us, why didn't you put it out 2 months earlier? Some people are saying, why didn't you wait another month? But, this has been a research almost 8 months in the making because this data set is relatively novel. The religious characteristics of states. This data set is fascinating. It's fascinating, and it has taken us, unfortunately, almost 8 months to put it together. Yeah. And once it went through the review and everything, it was ready, it was uploaded.
No, because the reason I ask is pretty plain to see, Professor Ravi. You can appreciate that. You've got an election campaign where Muslim quota is a big talking point. Jitni abadi utna haq has become a rallying cry as far as population are concerned. In that context, a report of this kind goes beyond just being a piece of research that's happened to drop at this point of time. And, people who believe that the timing isn't random, it's not coincidental, that's a justifiable fear.
I'm sorry, I lost you in the middle, but are you asking me to justify the timing of the report?
No, I'm saying that critics will say at a time when, Muslim quota and things like that, Jitni abadi utna haq, which has been a rallying cry by Rahul Gandhi and others, when that kind of thing, that kind of spotlight on the Muslim community has become a big flashpoint in the political conversation on the campaign trail, a report of this kind goes beyond just being a piece of research coincidentally dropping at this time. How would you defend that, ma'am?
Oh, but Shiv, I don't feel like, as a researcher, as a scholar, I really don't feel the need to justify the timing. Because like I told you, there will always be politics. And we are a democracy. Different parties are going to look at this result from very different angles, and they are going to use it, and that's perfectly fine. The point is, if we are able to accurately and objectively measure something, that at least forms an objective and a scientific basis to even have these discussions.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it is noise, right? It's anecdotal data of one politician versus another politician. So I think, scientific evidence, empirical evidence of this nature can only help sharpen and maybe improve the public conversation and the debates in this country.
You say that this report, Professor Ravi, is the first step, and there will be more. Can you explain what that means? How would such a report be used, by those that run the country? How useful is this information in terms of economic planning, etc.?
Well, this will have implications. And remember, we are a very big country here.
Yeah.
So we are saying at an all-India level, I frankly think one will have to look at these kind of demographic shifts and changes at much more localized and narrower level. Because remember, policy making is not just at the national level. So we will have to, and of course, one thing to note, which we highlight in the study, which I'm hoping the media will pick up and people will talk about, is there are very few countries in the world that even define minorities.
Yeah.
So think about, that's the reason I maintain and that India is therefore a highly progressive liberal democracy. Plural democracy, and the results of this study are basically proving that point quite substantially.
Yes.
That not only do we define and we have policies, but all these cumulative policies and the environment in the community as a whole has led to an increase in the share of minorities in the country's population over time. Because this has only happened in liberal democracies. Now remember, autocracies like China do not even define minority populations, right? And China is not is an isolated case. Many countries do not define minorities, right? And at the end of the day, democracy is a number game. So obviously, collectively we vote, we make a decision and representation, political representation for what kind of policies we want.
Yeah.
So I think this, I'm hoping, will form a basis for a lot of the conversation. Which have to do with religious demographics in this country, but I'm hoping to find out more. We should really have this information at more localized level.
Professor Ravi, I want to come to the Western media, the Western governments, and how they've portrayed India in the recent past as my last question. But before that, also the Muslim world specifically. We've seen in the preceding 2 or 3 years, there have been coordinated attacks on India with this narrative that India is anti-Muslim and it has oppressed its minorities. On the face of it, this report, flies completely in the face of that narrative, doesn't it?
100%. And let me also, again, very clearly state, Shiv, because we looked at the literature, we looked at the publications, we have seen very few studies in the recent, let's say, last 2 decades that have actually empirically even measured these changes. Right. So while this is not a study which is India focused, it's a global study. But to most of the people in this country, anecdotally, perhaps they know these trends to be there. What we have done is objectively measured it using this RCS data. So 100%. I think it's not just the Western media, but many, even within India, many public debates around India being, not a hospitable place or not being progressive when it comes to minorities or in particular, let's say, Muslim community. That's actually not true at all. And this is just looking at the global data. Now, please remember, it's not just the Muslim groups. The Christian group has also expanded.
Yeah.
The Buddhist group has also expanded. And by expansion, I'm not saying absolute numbers. The absolute numbers is increasing for everyone. It's the relative share in the right? So it's increasing for Buddhists, it's increasing for Sikhs. And that's why I maintain that what we have fundamentally known to be true, this report is just putting some numbers to what we objectively know to be true. So I'm hoping the Western scholars or people who are interested in Indian society and religious demographics of Indian society and how truly plural India is, I think this report they should read it and use it.
Because religious freedom in India, not restricted to that recent US report, has become something of a kind of a sticky headline for Western media, for want of a better phrase, as far as, when it comes to writing about India, especially during these elections. So my final question then, Professor Ravi, is on that the narrative of Western governments, and it isn't just the Western media, it's also the Western governments that have been trying to push this image of India as being oppressive to its minorities. This report is empirical, it's data. Does this empower India to battle that narrative in a bigger way now?
100%. I mean, this is, we are a liberal, plural democracy. And the reason we are a shining sort of example is also the context within which we live, which is, this part of Asia, which is where this is not common at all. Like I mentioned, minorities are actually falling alarmingly in our neighborhood.
Yeah.
And it's a testimony to our laws. It's a testimony to how truly secular and plural and liberal India's, social fabric is. So I have no doubt at all. But so in many ways, I was not surprised by the findings of the report. I'm guessing most people who watch demographic data will not be surprised. It might be a surprise to Western researchers, scholars, media personnel, governments, who, for reasons I think it's coming from either ignorance or whatever the intentions be.
Yeah.
But now here we have something objective to sort of challenge those fake narratives.
Professor Shamika Ravi, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking my questions. Thank you, ma'am.